Steam rose from the alien soil as Dr. Rebecca Stone pressed her face against the observation window of the research dome, her breath fogging the reinforced glass. The purple sky of Draconis Prime stretched endlessly above jagged crystal formations that jutted from the ground like frozen lightning. Each formation hummed with an energy that made her equipment dance with strange readings. But today something else had captured her complete attention. Far below in the sacred nesting grounds, massive dragon forms moved with grace that defied their enormous size, and their scales caught the light of twin suns, creating rainbow patterns that shifted and flowed like liquid metal across their ancient hides. Rebecca had been studying these magnificent beings for 8 months now, ever since humanity first made contact with their civilization, but she had never witnessed what was happening today. The great matriarch, a dragon whose wingspan could shadow entire city blocks, was in the final stages of laying her clutch. Her mate, equally impressive with horns that spiraled like twisted towers, circled protectively around the nesting site. Other dragons gathered at a respectful distance, their low rumbling songs creating harmonies that vibrated through the ground and up into Rebecca's bones. "Are you getting this recorded?" asked her research partner, Dr. Amy Rodriguez, as she adjusted the scanning equipment that lined their observation post. "And this is the first time humans have ever witnessed a dragon birth ceremony." Rebecca nodded without taking her eyes off the scene below. "Every sensor is active. This is incredible, Amy. Look at how they're arranging themselves in those patterns. It's like they're creating some kind of energy field around the nest." The ceremony had been going on for hours, with dragons arriving from across the continent to witness the birth of what the translation computers indicated would be exceptionally important offspring. The matriarch herself was over 3,000 years old and considered one of the wisest leaders of the Draconian Council. Her bloodline was said to carry the strongest flight magic in generations. As the twin suns reached their peak, a brilliant flash of silver light erupted from the nesting site, and the gathered dragons raised their voices in a song so powerful that the crystal formations began to resonate in harmony, creating a symphony that seemed to make the very air shimmer with possibilities. 3 eggs began to crack almost simultaneously, each one larger than a human adult. From the first emerged a dragon hatchling with scales that gleamed like polished gold, already showing the strong wing structure that promised incredible flight abilities. The second egg revealed a hatchling with deep blue coloring and eyes that sparkled with fierce intelligence. But it was the third egg that made Rebecca's heart skip several beats. The smallest hatchling emerged with scales of the most beautiful silver she had ever seen, like captured moonlight given form. But even from this distance, Rebecca could see something was different about this little one. While his siblings stretched magnificent wings and attempted their first clumsy flights, the silver hatchling struggled to even lift his wing membranes, which appeared thin and underdeveloped. More concerning still, his hind legs seemed weak and unsteady, causing him to stumble when he tried to follow his siblings. The other hatchlings took to the air with natural grace, but the silver one remained earthbound, looking up at them with large, confused eyes. The change in the dragon gathering was immediate and devastating. The harmonious songs stopped abruptly, replaced by what Rebecca's translation system interpreted as sounds of distress and disappointment. The great matriarch lowered her massive head to examine her smallest child, and Rebecca saw something that broke her heart. The ancient dragon's eyes filled with what could only be described as profound sorrow. "What's happening down there?" Amy asked, adjusting the audio receivers to better capture the dragon communications. Rebecca watched in growing alarm as the dragons began to form different patterns around the nesting site, and instead of celebration, she was witnessing what appeared to be some kind of judgment ceremony. The translation computers struggled to keep up with the rapid exchanges between the adult dragons, but certain phrases came through clearly. Earthbound curse, broken wings, punishment of the sky gods. The great matriarch's mate approached, the silver hatchling, and made a sound that the computers translated as something between a moan and a lament. Other dragons joined in. What Rebecca realized was not celebration, but mourning. "They think he's cursed," Rebecca whispered, her hands pressed against the glass. Amy, they think there's something wrong with him because he can't fly like the others. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything in the cultural databases humanity had compiled about dragon society. The adult dragons began to sing again, but these were songs of farewell and sorrow. Rebecca watched in horror as she realized what was happening. They were preparing to abandon the silver hatchling, according to dragon law. As the translation systems explained, any offspring born earthbound were considered touched by dark magic and had to be left in the place of forgotten wings, a desolate canyon where the bones of abandoned dragons had piled up over thousands of years. It was believed that keeping such individuals would bring catastrophe to the entire clan. The great matriarch gently picked up her silver child in her massive jaws and began the slow flight toward the canyon of abandonment. And her mate and the other dragons followed in a solemn procession that looked more like a funeral than anything else Rebecca had ever witnessed. "We have to do something," Rebecca said, her voice tight with emotion. "Amy, that little dragon isn't cursed. He's just different. His nervous system scans show normal brain activity. His wing muscles are underdeveloped, but his bone structure is intact. This is a medical condition, not some supernatural punishment." Amy looked uncertain. "Rebecca, we're observers here. The council made it very clear that we're not supposed to interfere with dragon cultural practices. Captain Lee was specific about maintaining our neutrality." But Rebecca was already moving toward the exit of their observation dome, and neutrality doesn't mean watching a baby die because of superstition. That hatchling has the same right to life as his siblings. Just because he can't fly doesn't mean he's worthless. "Where are you going?" Amy called after her. "To prevent a tragedy," Rebecca replied, grabbing her emergency medical kit and translator device. "And maybe to teach these dragons something about the human perspective on what makes a life worth living." As she headed for the transport that would take her to the place of forgotten wings, Rebecca could hear Amy frantically trying to contact Captain Lee. But Rebecca knew that by the time bureaucracy moved, it would be too late for the silver hatchling. Sometimes doing the right thing meant ignoring orders, and today was one of those times. The transport skimmed just above the jagged crystal formations as Rebecca raced toward the place of forgotten wings, her heart pounding with determination and fear. Below her, the procession of dragons moved like a dark cloud across the alien landscape, their mournful songs echoing off the canyon walls ahead. She reached the canyon rim just as the great matriarch landed on the ancient platform, where countless dragon young had been left over the millennia. The sight that greeted Rebecca made her stomach turn. Scattered across the rocky ledges were the bleached bones of dragons who had died alone, their wings never having known the joy of flight. The silver hatchling sat quietly in the center of the platform, his large eyes taking in everything around him with what Rebecca recognized as remarkable intelligence. He didn't cry or struggle like she might have expected, but instead seemed to be studying the bone fragments with curious fascination, as if trying to understand what they meant. The great matriarch nuzzled her child one final time, a gesture so tender and heartbreaking that Rebecca had to wipe tears from her eyes. Then, with visible effort, the massive dragon spread her wings and prepared to leave forever. "Wait," Rebecca shouted, her voice amplified by the translation device as she rappelled down the canyon wall. "Please, great matriarch, wait." Every dragon head turned toward her, their expressions ranging from surprise to anger. The great matriarch's mate let out a roar that Rebecca's equipment translated as something like, "Human interference forbidden." But Rebecca pressed on, her boots hitting the platform with a sharp crack that echoed through the canyon. She walked directly to where the silver hatchling sat, ignoring the powerful dragons that surrounded her with obvious hostility. "This little one isn't cursed," she said, her translator broadcasting her words in the harmonic tones that dragons used for serious communication. "He has a medical condition that can be helped. Your laws are based on old beliefs, but science shows us the truth." Elder Crimson, the most ancient of the dragons present, lowered his scarred head to glare at Rebecca with eyes like molten gold. "Human, you speak of things beyond your understanding. This hatchling bears the mark of the sky god's displeasure. To interfere is to invite disaster upon all dragonkind." Rebecca knelt beside the silver hatchling, who looked up at her with startling intelligence. When she extended her hand, he didn't recoil but instead sniffed curiously at her fingers. Up close she could see that while his wing membranes were indeed underdeveloped, the bone structure was perfect, just smaller and weaker than normal. "Look at him," Rebecca said, gently examining the hatchling's wings, while he chirped softly. "His bone density is normal, his neural pathways are intact, his muscle development is delayed, not absent. This isn't magic or divine punishment, it's genetics and biology." The great matriarch made a sound that seemed torn between hope and despair. "Even if what you say has truth, human, what difference does it make? He cannot fly. Among dragons, to be earthbound is to be nothing. It is better that he goes to the ancestors now than live a life of shame." "But what if he could move freely in other ways?" Rebecca asked, standing up to address the assembled dragons. "What if there were methods to help him navigate the world that don't require traditional flight? My species has learned to help individuals with physical limitations live full, meaningful lives." Elder Crimson snorted, a sound like distant thunder. "Humans crawl upon the ground like insects. You know nothing of what it means to be a creature of the sky. Without flight, this hatchling can never hunt, never mate, never participate in the sacred aerial dances. He would be a burden to the clan, though mio." Silver Hatchling made a soft sound that Rebecca's translator interpreted as something between curiosity and sadness. He seemed to understand more of the conversation than anyone expected, and Rebecca saw intelligence burning in those large eyes that reminded her of polished gemstones. "Give me 30 days, Rebecca said suddenly, surprising herself with the boldness of her proposal. "Let me take him to our research facility. If I can show you that he can live a fulfilling life despite his limitations, will you reconsider your laws?" The dragons exchanged rapid communications in frequencies that her translator couldn't fully process. Rebecca could sense the debate raging among them. Tradition against possibility, ancient wisdom against new ideas. Finally, the great matriarch spoke. "And if you fail? If after 30 days he remains earthbound and helpless, what then, human?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "Then I'll bring him back here myself and I won't interfere again, but I believe your son can surprise you. I believe he can find ways to soar that none of us have imagined yet." The silver hatchling chose that moment to make his own statement. He struggled to his feet and walked unsteadily to Rebecca's side, then gently pressed his small head against her leg. The gesture was clear enough that no translation was needed. Elder Crimson's eyes narrowed. The hatchling chooses the human over his own kind. Perhaps the curse runs deeper than we thought. But the great matriarch was studying the interaction with growing interest. "Or perhaps," she said slowly, "the little one sees something we do not. Very well, human. 30 days, but know this. If harm comes to my child because of your interference, the consequences will extend far beyond one hatchling's fate." As Rebecca gently lifted the silver hatchling into her arms, she felt the weight of not just his small body but of the promise she had made. The little dragon settled against her with surprising trust, his warm scales feeling like textured silk. "I'll call you Pip," she whispered to him as they prepared to leave the canyon. "And I promise you, little one, we're going to find a way for you to touch the sky." The flight back to the research facility was tense, with dragon escorts following at a distance to ensure their prince's safety. Rebecca held Pip carefully in the transport, amazed by how quickly he adapted to the human technology around him. He seemed fascinated by the displays and controls, his small claws gently touching various surfaces, as if trying to understand how everything worked. When they reached the research dome, Amy and the rest of the team were waiting with expressions that mixed concern, excitement, and outright panic. "Captain Lee is furious," Amy whispered, as Rebecca carried Pip into the medical bay. "He's been trying to reach you for hours. The Dragon Council is threatening to end all diplomatic relations if this goes wrong." Rebecca carefully placed Pip on the examination table, where he sat quietly and observed everything with remarkable calm. "Then we better make sure it doesn't go wrong. Amy, I need full medical scans, muscle density analysis, and neural pathway mapping. Matt, start thinking about mobility solutions. We have 30 days to change the course of an entire civilization's thinking about disability and worth. As the team sprang into action around them, Pip made a soft sound that Rebecca was beginning to recognize as his version of contentment. Despite everything he had been through, despite being abandoned by his own kind, the little dragon seemed to radiate an inner strength that reminded Rebecca why she had taken this impossible risk. Sometimes the most important revolution started with one small act of defiance against accepted cruelty. 3 weeks into the project, the research facility had transformed into something resembling a combination of a medical center, engineering workshop, and dragon playground. And Pip had adapted to human company with surprising ease, showing a curiosity about technology that amazed everyone who worked with him. Matt Chen stood in the center of the fabrication lab, surrounded by holographic projections of various mobility device designs. His engineering background had never prepared him for creating assistive technology for a baby dragon, but the challenge excited him more than anything he had worked on before. The main problem is weight distribution, he explained to Rebecca as Pip watched from his favorite perch on a modified examination table. Traditional anti-gravity systems are too powerful for his size, but regular mechanical supports won't give him the three-dimensional movement he needs to feel like he's really flying. Pip chirped softly and extended one small wing, as if offering his own input on the conversation. Over the past weeks, he had developed a remarkable ability to communicate with the humans through a combination of sounds, gestures, and expressions that conveyed complex ideas. Dr. Amy Rodriguez looked up from her physical therapy notes. His muscle development is actually progressing faster than I expected. The daily exercises are helping, but he'll always need external support for true aerial movement. Matt, what if we combined multiple systems, anti-gravity for lift, but mechanical supports for stability and directional control? Rebecca sat beside Pip and gently stroked his silver scales, which had grown more lustrous with proper nutrition and care. The dragons won't be impressed unless he can truly maneuver in 3 dimensions. Their entire culture revolves around aerial agility. He needs to be able to dive, climb, turn, and yes, even perform some of those aerial dances they consider so important. Captain David Lee entered the lab with his usual stern expression, but Rebecca had noticed that his disapproval seemed to soften whenever he actually saw Pip in action. The little dragon had a way of charming even the most hardened military personnel. I've been getting pressure from Earth Command, Lee said, though his tone lacked its usual edge. They want to know why we're spending resources on what they're calling an alien pet project. The diplomatic implications if this fails are significant. Pip made a sound that Rebecca had learned meant he was paying attention to the conversation. His intelligence continued to surprise everyone. He seemed to understand far more human speech than should have been possible, even with the translation devices. Sir, Matt said, turning from his holographic displays. This isn't just about one dragon. If we can prove that assistive technology can integrate successfully with dragon society, it could revolutionize their entire approach to individuals with physical differences. We are potentially changing the course of an entire civilization's understanding of worth and capability. Amy nodded enthusiastically. The medical data we're gathering is incredible. Dragon physiology is remarkably adaptable. Pip's nervous system has actually begun developing new neural pathways to compensate for his physical limitations. His brain is literally rewiring itself to work better with assistive technology. As if to demonstrate Amy's point, Pip carefully climbed down from his perch and walked over to one of Matt's prototype devices. He examined it with obvious intelligence, gently touching various components with his small claws. He's been doing that more and more, Rebecca observed. It's like he understands that we're building something to help him. Look at how he studies each design. Captain Lee watched Pip's behavior with growing interest. Has he shown any signs of wanting to return to his own kind? Rebecca shook her head. The opposite, actually. Yesterday, when a dragon patrol flew over the facility, he barely looked up. He seems more interested in what we're doing here than in reconnecting with dragon society. I think he's starting to see himself as part of our team. The truth was that Pip had become the heart of their small research group. His playful nature and obvious affection for his human caregivers had created bonds that went far beyond a simple rescue mission. He had claimed a sleeping spot in Rebecca's quarters and would follow her around the facility like a devoted companion. Matt activated a new holographic display showing his latest design concept. I think I've found our solution, a hybrid system that combines repulsion field generators with articulated wing extensions. It won't replace his natural wings, but it will give him lift and maneuverability. The key breakthrough was realizing that we don't need to make him fly like other dragons. We need to help him develop his own flying style. The design was elegant in its simplicity, a harness system that would support Pip's chest and distribute weight evenly, connected to wing-like extensions that would respond to his muscle movements while providing the lift his underdeveloped wings couldn't generate on their own. Amy studied the schematics with growing excitement. This could actually work, his wing. Muscles are weak, but they're functional. If the extensions amplify his natural movements while the repulsion fields provide lift assistance, he could have real control over his flight patterns. Pip approached the hologram and made a sound that everyone had learned meant intense curiosity. He walked around the projected image, studying it from different angles, then looked up at Matt with what could only be described as hopeful expectation. I think he knows this is for him, Rebecca said softly. Matt, how long before we can build a working prototype? Give me 48 hours, Matt replied, his eyes bright with determination. But there's something else we need to consider. Even if this works perfectly, we still have to convince the dragons that Pip's new abilities are legitimate. They might see assistive technology as cheating or artificial enhancement rather than genuine capability, Captain Lee nodded grimly. The cultural challenge might be bigger than the technical one. We're not just building a mobility device. We're challenging thousands of years of dragon beliefs about natural selection and divine will. That evening, as the team worked late into the night on final preparations for the prototype construction, Pip made his own contribution to the project. He had somehow gotten into Rebecca's personal quarters and retrieved one of her silver hair clips, which he presented to her with obvious pride. I think he wants to contribute something of his own to the design, Rebecca said, touched by the gesture. Matt, could we incorporate this somehow, make it part of the device? Matt examined the hair clip and smiled. Actually, silver has excellent conductive properties for the neural interface components. We could integrate this into the control system. It would mean that part of Pip's mobility device would literally be a gift he chose to give. As they worked through the night, with Pip curled up nearby watching every step of the construction process, Rebecca felt a growing sense that they were on the verge of something extraordinary. Not just a successful assistive device, but a fundamental shift in how two species thought about limitation, possibility, and the courage to dream of flight. The next morning brought news that sent tension through the facility, and a delegation of dragon elders, led by Elder Crimson himself, was approaching for an early inspection. Their 30 days weren't up yet, but apparently the Dragon Council had decided to see what progress the humans were making. They're coming to judge us, Amy said nervously. What if the device isn't ready? What if Pip can't adapt to it quickly enough? Rebecca looked at Pip, who seemed to sense the importance of what was happening. The little dragon stood straighter than usual and made a sound that Rebecca interpreted as determination mixed with excitement. Then we better make sure everything is perfect, she said. Pip has waited his whole life for a chance to soar. We're not going to let him down now. The morning air crackled with tension as massive dragon forms descended toward the research facility, their wing beats creating dust storms that forced the human team to take cover behind reinforced barriers. Elder Crimson led the delegation, his ancient scales bearing scars from battles fought long before humanity had even discovered fire. Behind him flew 5 other council members, each one radiating the kind of authority that came from ruling the skies for millennia. Pip stood in the center of the testing area, wearing his newly completed mobility device with obvious pride and excitement in. The silver harness gleamed against his matching scales, while the wing extensions folded elegantly along his sides like metallic feathers. Rebecca's hair clip had been integrated into the neural interface crown that rested between his small horns, catching the sunlight and creating rainbow patterns that danced across his face. "Remember what we practiced," Rebecca whispered, kneeling beside him as the dragons landed with earth-shaking impacts. "Trust the device, trust yourself, and most importantly, just have fun up there." Pip chirped softly and nuzzled her hand, then turned to face the assembled dragons with a confidence that amazed everyone watching. Despite being less than a month old, he carried himself with dignity that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside his soul. Elder Crimson approached with slow, deliberate steps that made the ground tremble. His golden eyes fixed on the mobility device with obvious skepticism, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ancient authority. "So this is the human solution," he rumbled, the translation devices struggling to convey the dismissive tone. "Metal wings and artificial magic. Tell me, small one, do you truly believe this contraption can grant you the gift that the sky gods denied?" Before Rebecca could intervene, Pip stepped forward and made a series of sounds that surprised everyone present. He was attempting to speak, in the formal dragon language of respect, something no human had ever heard him try before. His pronunciation was imperfect, but the meaning came through clearly in the translations. "Honored Elder, I do not seek to replace what was taken. I seek to discover what was given." The other dragons exchanged glances that Rebecca couldn't interpret, but she sensed a shift in their attention. Pip's response had been both humble and profound, suggesting depths of wisdom that seemed impossible in someone so young. Matt Chen stood at the control station, his hands hovering over the device activation sequences. "All systems show green," he called out. "Repulsion fields are calibrated. Wing servos are responsive. Neural interface is reading strong signals, Doctor." Amy Rodriguez monitored Pip's vital signs from her mobile medical station. Heart rate elevated but stable. Neural activity shows high engagement. He's excited but not stressed. I think he's actually looking forward to this. The great matriarch had remained silent until now, but as Pip prepared for his first flight attempt, she moved closer to her abandoned son. "Little silver one," she said, her voice carrying emotions that needed no translation. "If you fall, will you forgive your mother for not catching you?" Pip looked up at her with eyes that held no trace of anger or resentment. Instead, he made a sound that conveyed something like gratitude mixed with understanding. Then he spread his enhanced wings and activated the mobility system. What happened next would be remembered by every witness for the rest of their lives until the repulsion fields engaged with a soft humming sound, and Pip rose into the air with smooth, controlled grace. For a moment he hovered uncertainly, adjusting to the new sensations of true three-dimensional movement. Then his face lit up with pure, unbridled joy as he realized what was happening. His first trumpet of delight echoed across the testing area, a sound so full of happiness that even the most skeptical dragons couldn't help but respond. Pip began to move through the air with increasing confidence, the wing extensions responding to his muscle movements while the repulsion fields provided stable lift. But what truly amazed the watching dragons was how naturally he adapted to his new form of flight. Instead of copying traditional dragon aerial patterns, Pip began developing his own unique style of movement. He could hover in place like no dragon had ever managed. He could fly backward and sideways with precision that even the elders found impressive. "Look at that maneuverability," breathed one of the council members. "He moves like quicksilver through the air." "How is this possible?" Pip seemed to hear the comment and decided to show off. He performed a series of loops and spirals that would have been difficult for even fully grown dragons, his smaller size and enhanced control systems allowing for aerial acrobatics that were genuinely breathtaking. Elder Crimson watched in stunned silence as Pip approached him in midair, hovering at eye level with perfect stability. The little dragon made a formal gesture of respect, then gently touched the elder's scarred snout with one small claw. "Honored Elder," Pip said in his halting dragon speech, "do you see curse or do you see possibility?" The change in the dragon delegation was immediate and profound. What had begun as a skeptical inspection was transforming into something approaching wonder. The younger dragons in the group began making sounds of excitement and admiration, while even the conservative elders seemed to struggle with what they were witnessing. Pip spent the next hour demonstrating capabilities that no dragon had ever possessed. He could fly in perfect formation with hovering vehicles. He could navigate through tight spaces with precision that amazed everyone. Most importantly, he radiated joy in a way that was impossible to ignore or dismiss. "This is not merely compensation for weakness," observed one of the council members. "This young one has found abilities that surpass our traditional limitations. He flies in ways that we cannot." Rebecca felt tears of relief and pride running down her face as she watched Pip soar through aerial patterns that seemed to blend dragon grace with human innovation. The little dragon was not just succeeding, he was revolutionizing what flight could mean. The great matriarch approached Rebecca with an expression that mixed gratitude with something approaching awe. "Human, what you have given my son is not just movement. You have given him confidence. You have shown him that being different does not mean being lesser." As the demonstration continued, more dragons began arriving from across the continent, drawn by reports of the impossible sight. Word was spreading through dragon society that something unprecedented was happening at the human research facility. Pip seemed to sense the growing audience and rose higher into the air, where he began performing what could only be described as an aerial dance. His movements were fluid and graceful, combining elements of traditional dragon flight with innovations that were uniquely his own. "He's not just flying," Amy observed with wonder. "He's expressing himself. Look at how he moves. It's like he's telling a story through motion." Elder Crimson finally broke his long silence. "I have lived for over 4,000 years," he said. "Certainly. I have seen the rise and fall of civilizations. I have witnessed wonders that would blind lesser beings. But I have never seen anything like this." The old dragon paused, watching as Pip performed a maneuver that involved spinning while moving in 3 different directions simultaneously. "This hatchling has not overcome his limitations. He has transcended them. The question we must now ask ourselves is not whether he deserves to live among us. The question is whether we deserve to learn from him." As the twin suns began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Pip descended gracefully to land among his human family. His scales gleamed with health and happiness, and his eyes sparkled with the satisfaction of dreams finally realized. The dragons gathered around him now, not with pity or dismissal, but with genuine respect and curiosity. The demonstration had accomplished something far beyond proving that assistive technology could work. It had challenged fundamental assumptions about what it meant to be a dragon. Rebecca knelt beside Pip and gently helped him out of the mobility harness. "How do you feel, little one?" she asked. Pip's response needed no translation. He pressed against her with obvious affection, then looked up at the assembled dragons and made a sound that conveyed contentment, gratitude, and most importantly, hope for the future. The revolution in dragon thinking had begun. Word of Pip's successful flight demonstration spread across Draconis Prime, faster than wildfire through dry crystal forests. Within days, dragons began arriving at the human research facility from regions that had never before acknowledged outside contact. They came not as conquerors or skeptics, but as families carrying carefully hidden secrets that had been buried for generations. Rebecca found herself face to face with a phenomenon she had never expected. An elderly dragon named Sage Amber approached the facility, carrying what appeared to be a bundle of silver cloth in her massive claws. When she gently unwrapped the bundle, Rebecca gasped at what she saw. Another dragon with underdeveloped wings, but this one was clearly an adult who had somehow survived in secret. "His name is Whisper," Sage Amber explained through the translation systems. "He is my grandson. For 20 years, I have hidden him in the deep caves beneath my territory. Telling my clan he died at birth, I could not bear to abandon him to the place of forgotten wings." Whisper was larger than Pip, but moved with the same careful earthbound gait that Rebecca had first observed in the little silver dragon. His scales were a deep bronze color that caught the light beautifully, and his eyes held an intelligence that spoke of years spent observing the world from hiding. Amy immediately began medical scans while Matt started taking measurements for another mobility device. "His bone structure is actually stronger than Pip's," Amy observed. The muscle development is different because he's adult, but the same principles should apply. Over the following weeks, the trickle of hidden dragons became a steady stream. Families brought forward individuals they had secretly kept alive in defiance of ancient laws. Each case was unique. Some had wing deformities, others had problems with their hind legs, and a few had conditions that affected their depth perception or spatial awareness. What amazed Rebecca most was discovering how many dragons had been living in the shadows of their society. Conservative estimates suggested that nearly 1 in 50 dragon births resulted in some form of physical limitation, but these individuals had been systematically removed from dragon culture for so long that most people assumed they simply didn't exist. The human research facility transformed once again, this time into something resembling a rehabilitation center and cultural embassy combined. Matt Chen found himself leading a team of both human engineers and dragon craftsmen who were learning to work together on increasingly sophisticated assistive technology designs. The dragons are incredible to work with, Matt explained to Captain Lee during one of their progress briefings. Their understanding of energy manipulation is centuries ahead of ours. They're teaching us how to make the devices more efficient and responsive. Some of these new mobility systems are actually superior to what fully abled dragons can achieve naturally. But not all dragons welcomed these changes. Elder Granite, leader of the traditionalist faction, arrived at the facility with a delegation of conservative dragons who viewed the entire project as an abomination against natural order. His scales were black as volcanic glass, and his presence seemed to darken the very air around him. "You humans spread corruption like a plague," he declared, his voice carrying harmonics that made the crystal formations resonate with ominous tones. "These aberrations should have been allowed to die with dignity. Now you parade them around like circus performers, mocking the wisdom of our ancestors." The confrontation that followed was unlike anything Rebecca had experienced. Elder Granite's faction began what could only be described as a propaganda campaign, spreading the message that dragons who used human technology were no longer truly dragons at all. They claimed that assistive devices were a form of contamination that would weaken the entire species. The debate split dragon society in ways that hadn't been seen for thousands of years. Some clans embraced the new possibilities and began openly caring for family members they had previously hidden. Others doubled down on traditional practices and began enforcing the abandonment laws more strictly than ever. Pip found himself at the center of this cultural storm. Dragons from both factions wanted to see him, some with admiration and others with hostility. Through it all, the young dragon maintained his characteristic composure and continued developing his unique flying abilities. "He's becoming a symbol," Rebecca observed during a team meeting. "But I'm not sure that's fair to him. He's still just a baby dragon who wants to fly and play." The political situation became even more complex when the great matriarch made an unprecedented announcement. She declared that she was establishing a new clan specifically for dragons with physical differences, with Pip as the symbolic heir and future leader. This meant that instead of being outcasts, these individuals would have their own place in dragon society. The response from Elder Granite was swift and harsh. He challenged the great matriarch's authority and demanded a formal council of judgment to determine whether the new clan would be recognized. According to dragon law, such a council could result in civil war if the disagreement proved irreconcilable. During this tense period, something remarkable happened. Whisper, the adult dragon who had been hidden for 20 years, approached Rebecca with a request that surprised everyone. "I want to learn human language," he said through the translation system. "Not just words, but concepts. Your species thinks about problems differently than we do. I believe understanding human perspectives could help bridge the gap between our factions." Rebecca agreed immediately. And within weeks, Whisper was making remarkable progress in understanding human concepts of diversity, adaptation, and technological augmentation. More importantly, he began developing his own philosophy that blended dragon wisdom with human innovation. "The humans have shown us something we forgot," Whisper explained to a gathering of dragons from both factions. They have shown us that strength comes not from avoiding weakness, but from finding creative ways to transform limitations into advantages. Their technology doesn't replace our nature. It reveals possibilities we never imagined. Meanwhile, Pip continued to amaze everyone with his aerial abilities. He had begun performing regular exhibitions that drew dragons from across the continent. His flying style had evolved into something that was genuinely artistic, combining technical precision with creative expression in ways that no dragon had ever achieved. The breakthrough came when Elder Sage Crimson made a public statement that shocked both factions. The ancient dragon, who had initially been one of Pip's harshest critics, announced that he was formally requesting human assistance for a secret that he had kept for over 1,000 years. I too had an earthbound child, he revealed to a stunned gathering. A daughter born with wings that could not lift her magnificent spirit. I abandoned her according to the law, and I have regretted that decision every day since. If the humans can help others like her, then perhaps I can find peace with my ancient failure. The admission from such a respected elder changed everything. Dragons who had been hiding their own experiences began coming forward with stories of lost family members and secret regrets. The revelation that even the most traditional dragons had been touched by these issues undermined the entire foundation of the abandonment laws. As the Cultural Revolution spread throughout dragon society, Rebecca realized that they had accomplished something far beyond their original goal. They hadn't just saved one dragon or even created assistive technology. They had sparked a fundamental reevaluation of what dragon society valued and how it treated its most vulnerable members. Pip, now several months old and growing rapidly, seemed to understand the significance of what was happening around him. He had become more than just a success story. He was living proof that different didn't mean defective, and that innovation could honor tradition while transforming it. The stage was being set for changes that would reshape dragon civilization for generations to come. 5 years had transformed the landscape of Draconis Prime in ways that few could have imagined. Where once the place of forgotten wings had been a graveyard of abandoned dreams, now stood the Interspecies Rehabilitation Center, a gleaming complex of crystal and metal that reached toward the sky like a monument to possibility. Pip soared through the morning air above the center, no longer the small, uncertain hatchling that Rebecca had first rescued. He had grown into a magnificent young dragon whose silver scales now carried hints of gold at their edges. His mobility system had evolved with him, becoming more sophisticated and responsive as both his body and his abilities developed. Below him, the center bustled with activity that would have been unthinkable just a few years before. Dragons of all ages worked alongside human technicians and therapists, some learning to use new mobility devices while others taught traditional dragon healing techniques. The collaboration had created innovations that benefited both species in unexpected ways. "Pip, you're showing off again," called Dr. Rebecca Stone from the main platform, her voice carrying the affectionate exasperation of someone who had spent years watching her adopted dragon son push the boundaries of what was possible. Pip responded, with a graceful dive that brought him to a perfect hover just above her head. His flying style had become truly artistic over the years, incorporating elements that seemed to blend physics with pure expression. Other dragons often gathered just to watch him move through the air, and his techniques had become the foundation for a new school of aerial dance. "The ceremony delegation is arriving," Rebecca informed him. "Are you ready for today?" Today marked the 5th anniversary of the Festival of New Wings, and celebration that had grown from a small gathering at the Rehabilitation Center into the most important cultural event in dragon society. Dragons traveled from across the galaxy to attend, and this year's festival would include representatives from 12 different worlds. Pip's response was a series of gentle loops that Rebecca had learned to interpret as excited anticipation. He had become the unofficial ambassador for the new dragon philosophy of inclusion and adaptation, a role he carried with grace that impressed even the most traditional elders. The first arrival of the day was Elder Sage Crimson, now one of the strongest advocates for dragon rights and technological integration. His ancient scales had taken on a new luster since he began working with the Rehabilitation Center, and his eyes held a peace that had been absent during their first difficult encounters. "Young Prince," he said formally, using the title that Dragon Society had created for Pip. "The Council of All Clans has asked me to inform you that your proposal for the Advanced Mobility Academy has been approved. Construction will begin next season." Rebecca felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with her own accomplishments. The Advanced Mobility Academy had been Pip's idea, a school where dragons with physical differences could not only learn to use assistive technology but could also develop the leadership skills needed to guide their society toward even greater inclusiveness. As the morning progressed, more dragons arrived for the festival. Among them was Whisper, now the director of cultural integration programs, leading a group of young dragons who were learning to see physical differences as sources of strength, rather than shame. His bronze scales gleamed with health and confidence as he guided his students through practice maneuvers. Dr. Amy Rodriguez emerged from the medical wing with her latest progress reports. "The neural adaptation research is yielding incredible results," she told Rebecca. "Dragons who have been using mobility systems for extended periods are developing new brain pathways that actually enhance their cognitive abilities. The technology isn't just helping them move, it's making them smarter." Matt Chen approached with his newest innovation, a mobility system designed for dragons with sensory impairments. This one uses echolocation enhancement and vibration mapping. Elder Stormcloud has been testing it, and she says it's given her spatial awareness that surpasses even fully sighted dragons. The Rehabilitation Center had become a hub of innovation that attracted researchers and engineers from throughout the galaxy. Human technology had merged with dragon wisdom to create solutions that neither species could have developed alone. More importantly, the center served as proof that diversity and inclusion weren't just moral imperatives, they were practical advantages that made entire civilizations stronger. As the afternoon approached, dragons began gathering in the great amphitheater that had been carved into the crystal cliffs surrounding the center. The Festival of New Wings would begin with aerial demonstrations that showcased not just individual achievements, but the collective accomplishments of a society that had learned to value all its members. Pip took his position at the center of the performance area, flanked by dozens of other dragons whose mobility devices gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. Some used systems similar to his own, while others had equipment designed for their specific needs. Together, they represented a revolution in thinking that had spread far beyond Draconis Prime. The great matriarch, now elderly but still magnificent, addressed the assembled crowd with words that carried across the amphitheater like music. 5 years ago, we nearly lost something precious because we confused strength with sameness. Today, we celebrate the wisdom that our human friends have taught us, that true strength comes from embracing what makes each of us unique. When the Xiao aerial display began, it was unlike anything that had ever been seen in dragon culture. The participants moved through the air in formations that were both beautiful and impossible, their mobility systems allowing for coordinations and patterns that natural flight could never achieve. They told stories through motion, created living sculptures in 3 dimensions, and demonstrated capabilities that redefined what it meant to soar. Pip led the finale, performing a solo routine that had become legendary throughout Dragon Society. His movements seemed to capture pure joy in physical form, expressing emotions and concepts that had no words in any language. As he flew, other dragons joined him one by one until the entire sky was filled with dancers whose differences had become the source of their collective beauty. In the audience, Rebecca watched with tears of joy streaming down her face. She thought back to that first day when she had seen a small frightened hatchling about to be abandoned in a canyon of bones. The transformation from that moment to this seemed almost impossible, but it had happened one small act of courage at a time. As the festival concluded, Pip descended to where Rebecca waited. He had grown large enough now that she could actually ride on his back, something that delighted both of them during their private flights together. But today, he simply pressed his great head against her shoulder in the gesture of affection that had remained constant throughout all his changes. "I'm proud of you," she whispered to him. "Not because of how well you fly, but because of how much hope you've brought to others." Pip's response was a soft rumble that needed no translation. In the years since his rescue, he had learned to speak both dragon and human languages fluently, but some communications went deeper than words. As the twin suns set over Draconus Prime, painting the sky in shades of silver and gold that matched, Pip's scales, the Festival of New Wings, came to an end. But the changes it represented were just beginning to spread throughout the galaxy, carried by dragons who had learned that limitations were simply invitations to discover new forms of magnificence. The disabled baby dragon's joyful reaction to his first wheelchair had indeed brought tears and laughter, but more than that, it had brought hope to countless individuals who had been told they didn't belong. Sometimes the most profound revolutions began with one small act of refusal to accept that anyone should be left behind. And in the years to come, whenever young dragons faced challenges that seemed impossible to overcome, their elders would tell them the story of Pip, the earthbound hatchling who had taught an entire civilization how to soar and